صلى الله عليه وآله وأتى به وصيه، فإنا نسألك إن كنا صدقناك إلا ألحقتنا بتصديقنا لهما لنبشر أنفسنا بأننا قد طهرنا بولايتك. السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله، السلام عليك يا بنت نبي الله، السلام عليك يا بنت حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا بنت خليل الله، السلام عليك يا بنت صفي الله، السلام عليك يا بنت أمين الله، السلام عليك يا بنت خير خلق الله، السلام عليك يا بنت أفضل أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته، السلام عليك يا بنت خير البرية، السلام عليك يا سيدة نساء العالمين من الأولين والآخرين، السلام عليك يا زوجة ولي الله وخير الخلق بعد رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أم الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة، السلام عليك أيتها الصديقة الشهيدة، السلام عليك أيتها الرضية المرضية، السلام عليك أيتها الفاضلة الزكية، السلام عليك أيتها الحوراء الإنسية، السلام عليك أيتها التقية النقية، السلام عليك أيتها المحدثة العليمة، السلام عليك أيتها المظلومة المغصوبة، السلام عليك أيتها المضطهدة المقهورة، السلام عليك يا فاطمة بنت رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلى الله على روحك وبدنك، أشهد أنك مضيت على بينة من ربك، وأن من سرك فقد سر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله، ومن جفاك فقد جفا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله، ومن آذاك فقد آذى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله، ومن وصلك فقد وصل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله، ومن قطعك فقد قطع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله، لأنك بضعة منه وروحه التي بين جنبيه. أشهد الله ورسله وملائكته أني راض عمن رضيت عنه، ساخط على من سخطت عليه، متبرئ ممن تبرأت منه، موالي لمن واليت، معاديا لمن عاديت، مبغض لمن أبغضت، محب لمن أحببت، وكفى بالله شهيدا وحسيبا وجازيا ومثيبا. وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وإلى أمواتنا وأموات جميع الحاضرين. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة تسبق الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن، خلق الإنسان، علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان، والنجم والشجر يسجدان، والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان، وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان، والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار، وخلق الجان من مارج من نار، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ رب المشرقين ورب المغربين، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ كل من عليها فان، ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا، لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدهان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذ بالنواصي والأقدام، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون، يطوفون بينها وبين حميم آن، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ ذواتا أفنان، فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان تجريان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما من كل فاكهة زوجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق وجنى الجنتين دان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن قاصرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كأنهن الياقوت والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ومن دونهما جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مدهامتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان نضاختان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما فاكهة ونخل ورمان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن خيرات حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان حور مقصورات في الخيام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم.
कहाँ जाए आखे
بیابان ہر سو شکستہ ہے پہلو، اکیلی ہے زہرا، کہاں جائے آخر بیابان ہر سو شکستہ ہے پہلو، اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پہ پہرا مصائب کا صحرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، کہاں جائے آخر بیابان ہر سو شکستہ ہے پہلو، اکیلی ہے زہرا، در فاطمہ کو جلایا ہے تم نے، کیا وعدہ اپنا بھلایا ہے تم نے، در فاطمہ کو جلایا ہے تم نے، کیا وعدہ اپنا بھلایا ہے تم نے، تماچے نہ مارو مسلمانوں جاؤ، علی کو بلاؤ، اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پہ پہرا مصائب کا صحرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، بیاں کس سے جا کر کروں درد اپنا، ہے غیروں کی دنیا نہیں کوئی اپنا، بیاں کس سے جا کر کروں درد اپنا، ہے غیروں کی دنیا نہیں کوئی اپنا، کوئی جا کے بابا سے کہہ دو یہ جا کر کہ لے جاؤ آ کر، اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پہ پہرا مصائب کا صحرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، اے لخت جگر حسن ابن حیدر، یہ نانا کے پہلو میں سونے نہ دے گر، اے لخت جگر حسن ابن حیدر، یہ نانا کے پہلو میں سونے نہ دے گر، تم آ جانا پہلو میں سو جانا ماں کے بقی میں، یہاں پر اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پہ پہرا مصائب کا صحرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، سر مرگ اختر تھا زہرا کا نوحہ، کب آؤ گے مہدی کب آؤ گے بیٹا، سر مرگ اختر تھا زہرا کا نوحہ، کب آؤ گے مہدی کب آؤ گے بیٹا، خدا کے لیے اب یہ پردہ ہٹا دو، چلے آؤ अकेली है ज़हरा, रोने पहरा मसाइब का सहरा, अकेली है ज़हरा।
Jazakallah. Before we invite up Sheikh Salim, we just want to please ask everyone to read Surah Fatah for the marhum of the sponsors for the program tonight, as well as your marhum. Please recite Surah Fatah for Mubarak Ali, Sayyida Razia Mubarak, Jafar Hussain, Qasim Jafar, Amjad Ali, Najma Jafar, and Abad Sheikh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وخاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعن الله الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من ليلتنا هذه إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected elders, brothers, sisters, we've gathered here for a third evening to show our love and our dedication and to express our loyalty to Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra alayha salam, and to give our condolences to our living Imam on the Shahada anniversary of his grandmother according to the riwayah of 75 days. Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra salam alayha was somebody who manifested excellence in every dimension. We hear stories from her life about her ibadah, about her hard work, about her support for her family, about her teaching others about Tawheed and about the practical laws, and many other dimensions of her life. But one of the most outstanding dimensions is the role that she played from a political perspective. And this is something that we see towards the end of the life of Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra. Fadak was a piece of land that was the private property of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi Islamic law states that that land which is acquired through warfare is the property of the Muslims jointly, but that which is acquired without warfare is something which is at the disposal of the Prophet. And our Prophet was looking ahead, and he understood, of course, what the political currents would be. And he determined that this land would be something that would be given to his descendants. Not so that they would be personally taking care of it, not something that he was looking at it from that perspective, but rather that this would be a support for those who would be the partisans of the family of Muhammad, meaning the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And this was the purpose behind Fadak being used, and this is why the Prophet gave it to his daughter. This was something that he had given to her, and it was part of her inheritance. One of the first things that the Khalifa did upon assuming that position was that he ordered his own people to go, and they went to Fadak and they told those who were maintaining the gardens there that from now on, whatever it is that you get and you sow and reap from this garden, you have to give it to us. No longer should it be sent to the family of the Prophet. And history tells us that when Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam came to know about what had happened, she determined that it was her responsibility to make an issue of this. Why? Why would somebody who had grown up in a life of zuhd, a life of disattachment from the dunya, a life where for the most part she was shielded from the public eye, why in this situation did she determine that it was her responsibility to take a stance on this issue, a public stance, because she knew that this was not just about a piece of land. This is something that we see echoed in later times. For example, in one incident when Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam he had been summoned to the court. Harun al-Rashid wanted to speak with him. Harun says that, why don't you take back Fadak? All the Khulafa knew that this Fadak was something that belonged to the Ahlul Bayt. And at times they would sometimes give and then they would take it back and whatnot. Both among the Umayyad Khulafa and the Abbasid Khulafa. So Harun al-Rashid says that, this actually belongs to you. I know that this is the fact, so why don't you take it? So Imam Musa al-Kadhim asked him, so what do you mean by Fadak? Because you know that borders change. It's been some generations now since that Fadak that was given to Fatima alayhi salam. That Fadak is something different than the Fadak of today. So Imam Musa al-Kadhim, Harun al-Rashid asks him, he says that, can you tell me what are the borders? Define them for me at this point. And when Imam Musa alayhi salam begins to say that this is the northern border, this is the southern border, this is from the east, this is from the west, Harun realizes that the entirety of the Muslim world was now encompassed in Fadak. Why? Because Fadak wasn't a land, it was a symbol of the authority of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, of the wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. This was not something that was up to the people to just take away and snatch away. Just like it was not their right to take away this land from Fatima alayhi salam. And when Harun hears this from Imam Musa, then he says, well, what's going to be left for me? And he realizes what is it that the Imam alayhi salam was trying to convey. Now in history, this sermon that Fatima alayhi salam gives is recorded and it has been reported through numerous chains. And it's a text that needs to be studied. The great scholars say that if you go and compare the teachings of this to other, lofty teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, this is like a sermon of Nahj al-Balagha. This is what they say. I just want to mention a couple of points from that and then inshallah move to the topic for today. First of all, when Fatima alayhi salam begins, the hadith says that first of all, she went with perfect hijab, and she goes into this gathering of the Muhajirin and the Ansar, at which Abu Bakr is located. With that modesty and with that hijab, she begins to speak, and when she begins, somehow some type of a wail she lets out, that everyone who's there, they realize that something is drastically wrong, that the daughter of the Prophet has now come out and she has something to say. And everyone's attention is captured. And then she begins. And how does she begin? Alhamdulillahi ala ma an'am wa lahu shukru ala ma alham wa thana'u ala ma qaddam min umumi ni'amin ibtada'aha wa subughi ala'in asdaha, and ila akhirih, and so on and so forth. This speech of hers was composed extemporaneously. She hadn't prepared it. But the great scholars, they say that if you want to know who Fatima alayhi salam was, if you want to know what her status was, you can go and study what the ahadith say about what the Prophet said about her. You can go and say what Imam Ali alayhi salam said about her. Or you can go and see what the Imams after her said about her. You can also go and see the very words that she herself spoke, and then you can understand some glimpse of who Fatima was. Some little bit of the profundity and the depth of who Fatima was. Just see how she speaks about Allah, with what depth. Glory be to Allah for His great blessings. Gratitude to Him for that which He inspired. And praise be to Him for what He has brought to pass. And then she goes on to describe, what is it, a blessing of Allah? How can you measure it? What does it mean? What is our response that's due upon us when we consider all the blessings that Allah has showered upon us? There are at least 30 verses of the Quran that Fatima alayhi salam makes use of in this speech, which is known as the Sermon of Fadak. And she weaves them in so skillfully into her speech, as if the Quran is just with her. It's part of her. It's one with her speech. And as part of this, she makes a point to comment on the political climate at that time. And this is the point I want to make, that here we have this lady who, yes, she was dedicated to her worship and her devotion and supporting her father and supporting her family and taking care of her kids. But she was somebody who was deeply aware of her responsibility when it came to the political environment, of supporting the imam of the time. And you can tell from her speech that she was not at all ignorant or simple when it came to her being able to perceive the deeper workings of what was happening. She was seeing through the plans of these people and their plots very clearly. And that's why we see in her speech that she says that when Allah chose, and I'm just taking the translation, when Allah chose to take His Prophet, the thorny tree of hypocrisy appeared amongst you, and the robe of a religion became ragged. You were wearing something, you were showing that you belonged to the people of religion, but now that robe started to fade away. Your true colors started to show. The misguided who were previously silent began to speak. What is she talking about here? She's saying she understands exactly the events that were taking place while the body of the Prophet was left unburied. The unknown few arose and the liars came forward, braying like camels as they strutted, wagging their tails to your courtyards. Shaitan raised his head from his hiding place and called out to you. He found you responsive to his call and attentive to his deception. Brothers and sisters, the great scholars, they tell us that these words of hers that were spoken, not only were they an eye-opener to the people who were present at that time, because when she spoke, obviously the word came out that the daughter of the Prophet is saying these things. What is she trying to convey to us? But not only was it something that was a powerful message at that time, but for centuries to come, this became a sanad. This became something that the Shias would refer to and say that, okay, you say what you're saying, but what was the position of the daughter of the Prophet, of the household of the Prophet? What was her position? What was her take on the events? And throughout history, it's been that document which is a proof that this is what the Ahlul Bayt, and this is the dhulm that was done to them. But brothers and sisters, there's one line that I just want to say, and then inshallah move on, where when she's saying to Abu Bakr regarding her claim to the land of Fadak, she says this line, وَزَعَمْتُمْ أَنْ لَا حَظَّ لِي وَلَا إِرْثَ مِنْ أَبِي. You claim that there's nothing that I'm inherited by, I can't inherit anything, right? Is it the case, she asks, أَفَخَصَّكُمُ اللَّهُ بِآيَةٍ أَخْرَجَ أَبِي مِنْهَا? Has it the case that a verse has been revealed to you that somehow my father was excluded from? Right? Are you getting a Quran that my father's not getting? أَمْ تَقُولُونَ, or is it that you say إِنَّ أَهْلَ مِلَّتِينَ لَا يَتَوَارَثَانِ? And this is something where one of our great scholars, Ayatul Jawadi, he says that there's a line in this sermon which is more heartbreaking than whatever physical wounds may have been done to Fatima alayhi salam. Right? And it's this line that he points to. He says that Fatima has to ask them that, is it the case that you think that وَلَسْتُ أَنَا وَأَبِي مِنْ أَهْلِ مِلَّةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ? Is it the case that somehow you imagine that me and my father are not from the same religion? Meaning what? That are you somehow indicating that I'm not a Muslim, that I should not be able to inherit from her father, just like any Muslim has the right to inherit from? Imagine that Fatima alayhi salam has to stand in front of a crowd of people and ask them that somehow, do you doubt my Islam? And this is none other than Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen. Right? This is the sanad, this is the document that we have of proof that has been there from throughout history. And then she goes on to say, that أَمْ أَنْتُمْ بِخُصُوصِ الْقُرْآنِ وَعُمُومِهِ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ جَاءَ بِهِ. Is it the case that somehow you now have more knowledge about the verses of the Quran and how to interpret them than the people that it came to? This is the position that you are assuming for yourselves? This is an example for us, brothers and sisters. An example of how is it that a Muslim, a Muslimah, a mu'minah, how is it that when it comes to performing their duties, it's something which is a comprehensive, holistic approach. Fatima alayhi salam, when he was called for, you find her supporting her father. You find her nursing the wounded on the battlefield. You find her bringing food to her father at the trench, at the battle of the trench. But when the duty calls for it, you find Fatima alayhi salam with all the modesty, but having that courage to speak up for the truth, having that courage to make sure that her imam is not left without any support. Inshallah, we can use this example of Fatima alayhi salam as inspiration for ourselves. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, the topic that I began 2 nights ago, which was inspired from the teachings and the life of Fatima alayhi salam, is the topic of amal and ilm. How can we bridge this gap that we sometimes have between what we don't know and what we ought to know, and what we put into practice and what we know? If we are honest with ourselves, oftentimes we see that there's a gap there. There are things that sometimes we're in a type of like fog when it comes to some of those things that we really ought to know. I gave the example the other night of, something which is very simple. It's very pervasive, but we find that unfortunately, in many households, there seems to be a lack of awareness about the impact of the entertainment industry and what it's rooted on and the effect that it can have on somebody. Then we have a challenge when it comes to sometimes being able to be passionate about what we ought to know and being something that we give value to it. And we talked last night about how in postmodern thinking, we oftentimes are caught in this trap where we don't want to we feel that somehow we need to look at everything with suspicion. And we have to think of everything from where we ourselves are at the center of it. And I give some examples of how that can lead to being in a state of permanent doubt. Whereas our teachings of our faith, they call us to identify what's right, identify what's wrong, and put your heart there too. Make it be something of value to yourself. Tonight, I want to mention, I know I'm aware of the time. I don't want to take too much time, inshallah, so I'll keep my comments short. But I want to continue this topic. I want to first mention a hadith which is reported from Fatima alayhi salam regarding the concept of striving to perform the best of actions. She says in this hadith, which is reported from her, it's a commonly reported hadith. Please recite salawat. She says, "Man as'ada ila Allahi khalisa ibadatihi ahbata Allahu azza wa jalla ilayhi afdala maslihatih." The hadith says this, that whoever causes to ascend to Allah the most pure of his actions of worship, Allah causes to descend for him that which is in his best interest. This hadith talks about a chain of action and reaction. That when somebody really tries and puts that effort to focus on their amal, focus on that action, and they work on it and they work on it until it reaches that level of ikhlas, of purity. They get rid of all the deficiencies. They get rid of all the false motivations, those niyyah and that intention which is misguided, and they make it purely for the sake of God. The result of that is that Allah Ta'ala will send down for them whatever is in their best interest, meaning that they're going to see the reaction in their lives. And I want to take this hadith as inspiration for the comment that I want to make right now, which is that oftentimes when we are looking and trying to understand what we ought to do, we're trying to decide, okay, make a plan for ourselves that, okay, I'm going to make this decision and that decision. We sometimes simplify this process and we don't take enough time to look at it from enough angles. Sometimes, those who are religiously inclined, they say that, okay, well, at least I need to understand what's haram and what's wajib, and I need to stick with that, right? Because that is something what we know has been given to us as a criterion. And this is very important, right? This is the core, this is the basis that I need to be fully aware that these are the red lines. This is the parameters that I need to operate in. The haram, the halal, wajib, right? And this is why those who are conscientious about this, they sometimes find themselves challenged, especially, in the modern era where we have so many different things where sometimes there's a lot of gray area. What am I supposed to do in this case? I've been offered this job, this position where, it's going to be in, communicating with this entity which deals with interest, right? Or we're making some defense weapons or some offensive weapons, and we're going to be selling them to certain countries. So what is my responsibility in this case? What about my investments? How do I calculate the khums for that? And some people, you see that they're always striving, they're always searching for understanding what is their practical Islamic responsibility. And this, brothers and sisters, is very important. I can't emphasize this enough, and inshallah, it's something that we know is very important. But sometimes this approach can also be somewhat limiting, because we know that our deen has given us a lot of freedom in many areas. It's given us those baselines. It says that, okay, this is the haram, this is what's wajib, but then in between you have a lot of leeway. I'll give you an example of, let's say, like a tattoo, right? This comes up, right? Can I have a tattoo, right? What is the approach to that? And sometimes, again, the religiously minded people will first want to know, well, what's the Islamic position on this? And maybe sometimes we're quick to, let's say, do a search and we find the website of our marja and we say that, okay, as long as this is not the case, then, okay, bismillah. They don't say bismillah, but they say that it's permissible. Right? It's permissible. It's like, fine, okay, great. Here it goes. Okay, mom, dad, I have it right here. Okay, bismillah, I'm going to go and do it. Right? Now, I'm not making a comment on whether you should get a tattoo or not. That's not my purpose for the speech tonight. That's a separate discussion. Inshallah, we have a lot of good discussions with our youth, in other forums for these type of things. But what I want to say is this, that when we study the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, what they call us to is a more holistic approach to determining what we ought to do and what we not to do. Let me quote a tradition we have from Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says, إِيَّاكَ وَكُلَّ عَمَلٍ يُنَفِّرُ عَنْكَ حُرًّا أو يذل لك قدرا أو يجلب عليك شرا أو تحمل به إلى القيامة وزرا. He says that when you're trying to decide what you should do and what you shouldn't do, then look at 4 things. Not just one thing, look at 4 things. What are those 4 things? First of all, make sure that what you do doesn't rob you of your freedom. You've been created as a free person. But sometimes through your own action, you become chained down. You no longer possess that type of freedom. Don't do that to yourself. That's very powerful, right? Number 1. Number 2, don't do something that causes you to lose your status. You've been given a very important amana, a trust from God, which is your status in front of others. Preserve that. You have dignity, preserve that dignity. Sometimes it might be the case that you have to give up that dignity for the sake of Allah. Then in that case, of course, we know that Allah will restore your dignity. But as far as possible, don't throw away that dignity that you've been given from God. Number 2. Number 3, he says, don't do that thing which will attract evil to you. Right? Sometimes there might be something which is even halal. But when you go and examine what are going to be the consequences of that, there's something that's waiting for you. And it's just a matter of time where it will come back to bite you. Avoid that. And number 4 is don't do something which will cause you to be weighed down when you have to cross the path, that's sirat in the hereafter. So you see there's like 4 different criteria. And you can imagine somebody who is conscientious, right? That as they're planning, right? As they're doing muhasaba, they're planning, they're looking and trying to make decisions. What they're doing, you can see almost that they have like a chart in front of them. And they're saying that for each one of these things that I'm doing, how does it measure against these 4 criteria, right? And if we start to do this type of thinking, right, suddenly doors of wisdom can open up to us. And we can start to see things about where the course of life that we're taking that otherwise, we might have been blinded to. You see, within the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, there's always this emphasis on trying to up our game, trying to work harder, trying to do with whatever resources we have, trying to do better with them. I'm reminded of this one story we have from our 4th Imam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. One time he was, engaged in deep worship of Allah Ta'ala, sujood, Quran, dua. And after he had become tired, right, physically tired, he went and he opened some type of container he had in which he was storing those things which were precious to him. And in that there was a document, and he began to read this document. The hadith says that this document was a description of the ibadah of Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And when Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is reading this, afterwards he makes this comment that he sighs and he says that who is it that can have the worship of Amirul Mu'mineen? Here is Sayyidus Sajideen, the one who will be identified on the Day of Judgment according to hadith as Zainul Abidin. And here he's saying that who can have the worship of Amirul Mu'mineen? What is the point here? That even for someone like Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he's always saying that, okay, this is where I am. How can I go to the next level? So one practical teaching that we have, I want to share with you tonight, and then inshallah, I will move to the Masaib. That one of the teachings we have from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is regarding the concept of hope when it comes to our actions. Hope is something which is very important. Without hope, right, all of our efforts would fail. Right? And it's been identified for us. Our Prophet has a hadith report for him. He says that if it hadn't been for hope, then nobody who plants seeds would even plant that seed. No mother would tend to her child, because a lot of what we do is depending on the system to take care of things for us. Right? Imagine those 9 months that a mother spends waiting for the delivery of her child, the mother and father. Right? They don't know what's happening inside. Maybe once in a while they get like a black and white picture of I don't know what, and it kind of may say something to the doctor. But for the most part, it's trusting in the system, right? There's something else going on here. There's someone else who's doing what he has to do here. And that's how it continues for the rest of our lives. Much of what we do is outside of our own control, including whatever has to do with our own bodies. But brothers and sisters, there's a time when our reliance on the system can be something that blinds us, where we become content with a certain way of doing things and we forget about those laws which are in place. And that is something which is called tulul amal. When somebody has so much hope that that hope becomes a means of deception. I'm going to talk about how that affects us practically. But first I want to share with you a story from the life of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was one of his dear companions, somebody who was close to him, who one time news comes to the Prophet that he had made a significant purchase. It's a very ordinary day-to-day matter here, right? We can relate to this practically. He had made a purchase, but he had made a promise that he was going to pay for this purchase at a later date. And when the Prophet heard that, he was actually disappointed with him. And he made a comment. He said that that person is tawilul amal. His hope is something which has gotten the better of him. Now, I want to make a comment here that, oftentimes we do things like we take loans, right? We maybe, let's say, buy a home, right? And a lot of it's based on like what's going to happen in the future. And that's pretty much the system that we live in here. Nobody buys things just with cash, right? So we need to understand what is it that the Prophet was trying to say. And it's very important that we think about this and ponder upon it. The Prophet goes on to explain. He says that when it comes to myself, the Prophet says, I do not have any guarantee that when I close my eyes for a blink of an eye, that I'm going to open them up again. And that when I put some food in my mouth, that it's going to find its way into my digestive system. Even to that extent, I don't give myself a guarantee. And then he addresses those who are gathered there at that time, and he says that you should imagine yourselves among the mota, meaning that imagine yourself as if that you are basically gone from here, and then plan accordingly. Now, there's a wrong way of understanding this, which is that somebody, let's say, is has one foot in the grave, right? They're always thinking that, okay, I have to be morbid and I can't do anything planning for the future. That's not right. But what the Prophet is saying is that sometimes it can be the case that somebody becomes deceived. They're being careless. And that's what was the case when it came to the companion. Maybe he wasn't in the financial position to be able to pay it at that date. He was being almost like a type of gamble. He was being careless. Not that what he did was haram. He probably went through it with all the legal provisions, but he was being careless. Why? Because he wasn't looking at, his financial situation. He wasn't looking at the fact that, well, time is passing. What happens if let's say something were to happen to him? Who's going to pay off that loan at that time? So on a practical level, when we're trying to, make our actions more pure, trying to make decisions, trying to plan, one of the things that we can consider is that sometimes we're deceived by this sort of illusion that as if we're here forever. As if we have endless number of days to do what we need to do. And this can sometimes cause huge problems. I'll give you a very practical example. We see that overall in the society we're in, people are getting married later and later. They want to finish their education, not just that. Then they want to find a career, not just that. They want to become established in their career. Sometimes it's not just that. They have certain career aspirations. And then only when they get to that aspiration, then they say, okay, I've done that. right? I've given all of it, and now I can start thinking about, the family thing. And sometimes it can be like 40 years old or even beyond that. And that's something which we see the same trend being reflected among Muslims as well, right? In our community as well, that the age continues to go up and up. Now, the teachings of our faith say that that which is sweetest is that when it's done, it's taken at the ripest time. When you have that type of vitality, when you have that energy, this is the time to be thinking about family building. When you can run around with your children, when you can be there with them, when you can resonate with what they're going through. This is the optimal time. Yes, if we want to ignore reality, we might say, no, I have plenty of time in the future. We'll look at it from a medical perspective, right? What do the experts say in medicine? That the longer you delay, then there's a lot of complications and risks that can occur as well. Sometimes it comes up with our health, right? That we think that, okay, well, I might be enjoying good health right now, and so I don't need to take care of myself, right? I can just sort of, slip away from those type of good habits, right? What happens is that that's being deceived by this hope that I have in something which is a falsehood. We know that what we do to our bodies, eventually we'll see the reaction of that. It might not come in our younger years, but it can be seen at later years. That type of lifestyle where I'll ignore my basic needs, to achieve this sort of like thing. I need to burn my way through success as the way they define it to me. Sometimes it can cause huge problems later on in my life. All of these would be classified as this concept of tulul amal. I've been deceived by that. The hope God gave me was there to encourage me to work hard, but within certain boundaries, while I keep in mind reality. A reality is that our death has been written for us. We have a maximum time period, which the Quran tells us, ajalun musamma. There is a time where all of us will die. Yes, it may be the case that certain acts that we do may give us more life, or certain acts we do that might actually subtract from our lives. But there is a maximum time in which after that, there's no more living. Same thing with aging. وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ. Allah says in the Quran very clearly, whoever we give life to, we take away from their physical creation. And these are realities that we need to come to terms with. So on this evening, I want to, this topic is a vast topic, the topic of bridging the gap between what we know and what we practice. But at least we've tried to take a few of these teachings from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the Quran, about what we can do, whether it be gaining that knowledge, whether it be understanding the need to have attachment to the khair and that type of hatred towards shar. And tonight we talked about the concept of hope and how it can be something which is a source of deception when it comes to our planning and our future planning and deciding what we need to do. We ask Allah Ta'ala to help us understand the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and put them into our lives. Tonight we've gathered to remember a very sad tragedy in the history of Islam. We can go to the graves of great ones throughout history and we can visit them and we can send our salams to them. Many have gone right now to Karbala and to Najaf and to Mashhad and other places, and they're sending salams to them. But where is it that somebody who has that desire to visit Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen, where would they go? Why is it that this grave has been deliberately made unknown to us throughout history? This itself is a source of great concern and grief. What is it that made Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam want this to be something that would be in history, that people would always ask, why did the daughter of the Prophet not want her grave to be known? Let's take our hearts to the house of Fatima alayhi salam on this evening. Sallallahu alayki ya bint Rasulillah. Sallallahu alayki ya bint Nabiyillah. صلى الله عليك يا سيدة نساء العالمين. Peace and blessings be upon you, O mother of Hassan and Hussein, O daughter of Rasulullah, O wife of Ali. Peace and blessings be upon you, O the radiant one, O the one whose light would shine for the people of the heavens when she would stand in worship to Allah. Peace and blessings be upon that lady and her home. Which home was this in Medina? It was this very home that our Prophet would go and visit, first of all, when he would return back from his journeys. It was this very home which was the last home that the Prophet would bid farewell to when he was journeying outside of the city of Medina. It was this home that every morning after the revelation of Ayatul Tathir, the Prophet would stop and say, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. Indeed, Allah wishes to remove all impurity from you, O Ahlul Bayt, وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا, and to purify you with a thorough purification. We have to ask this question, that why was this the same home that the enemies of Islam, the munafiqeen, that they brought their firewood to? Why was it this very home that they felt so bold as if to threaten that they will burn it down, even though Fatima alayha salam was in it? Ya Fatimatu Zahra. Imagine the situation of the home of Fatima after her martyrdom. Imagine her young children. It's so difficult for a child to see such a traumatic incident in front of their very eyes, especially when it happens to their mother, especially when their mother is Fatimatu Zahra. Imagine the situation of Imam Ali alayhi salam. What type of grief must he be feeling in his chest as he's carrying out the instructions of Fatima? Imam Ali alayhi salam is alone. He is digging the grave. He has followed the instructions. Why is he alone? Because Fatima alayha salam had told him, "O Ali, you be the one who buries me." The hadith says, فَلَمَّا نَقَضَ يَدَهُ مِن تُرَابِ الْقَامِ آجَ بِهِ الْحُزْنِ. When Ali alayhi salam was flattening the earth of the grave, the grief overcomes him. The tears begin to spill from his eyes. At this point, what does he do? Where does he get comfort from? He turns his face to the grave of Rasulullah. He says, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah. Peace be upon you, O Messenger of Allah. But I've come here to convey my salam, not only from myself, but on behalf of someone who is now going to be buried in the ground near you. She is your beloved. She is the delight of your eyes. Ya Rasulallah, The leader of the women is now being buried next to you. قد استرجعت الوديعة. Ya Rasulullah, I am giving you back the amana, the trust that you had given to me. Perhaps Imam Ali alayhi salam is referring to that day when Rasulullah wed Fatima to Ali. Rasulullah told him, "Oh Ali, this is my amana, this is my trust that I am giving to you." Now Ali is giving back that trust to Rasulullah. Ya Rasulullah, she is being buried next to you. But when you see her, she has some news to deliver to you. Make sure you ask her what happened. Make sure you ask her what the people did to her, how they took away her rights, how they wanted to do away with her. Make sure to ask her those questions, Ya Rasulullah. But I know that Allah will judge between her and between them. It reminds me of that time when Zainab alayhi salam was standing. She was watching what was happening to her brother Imam Hussein. Where can she get comfort from at this moment? She too turns to Rasulullah. Ya Jadda, Ya Rasulullah, هذا حسين بالعراء. This is Hussein in the desert. Imam Ali alayhi salam buries Fatima, but we know he did not leave the grave so fast. He spent some time there reciting Quran. He spent some time there making dua. We don't know what other conversation he had, what type of secrets, what type of grief and sorrow he was expressing to Fatima. But we know that at one point he cries out to her, "Why is it that when I cry out to you, Fatima, you don't respond?" But after all, how can you respond when you are beneath the earth, oh my beloved? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We ask Allah Ta'ala to accept this majlis from us, and if there's any thawab in it, for that thawab to be given to the marhumin for whom this majlis was sponsored, and to the marhumin and marhumat of this jam, of this gathering, and all the marhumin and marhumat. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us among those who are considered and counted among the Shia of Fatima and Ali, and we ask Him to hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin.
عجیل در فرج آقامون صاحب العصر و الزمان صلواتی عنایت بفرمایید. یا فاطمه زهرا، یا فاطمه زهرا، یا فاطمه زهرا، ما پرغمه اشکامون نم نمه دل ما پرغمه بیت الاحزان تو تموم عالمه یا فاتح جانم یا فاطمه زهرا یا امشب عالم اسلام بی مادر شدا تم زهرا گل یاس علی ای نور ازلی آینه بر رخ حی لم یزلی گل یاس علی ای نور ازلی آینه بر رخ حی لم یزلی ای جان مصطفی جانان مرتضی ای جان همه با هما جانان فضا مادر حضرت سلطان کربلا یا فاطمه زهرا یا جانم یا فاطمه یا فاطمه زهرا به فدای تو قصه دلهایم ایشالله تا ابد بمونیم سائلت به فدای تو قصه های دلت ایشالله تا ابد بمونیم سائلت بانوی شهیده مثل تو کی دیده میخوندی نافله با قد خمیده یا فاتح یا فاتح یا فاتح را مزهرا یا فاتح روی لبها نور و قدر و کوثر و طاقا ذکر نورانی عاشق ها تسبیحات حضرت زهرا روی لبها نور و قدر و کوثر و طاقا ذکر نورانی عاشق ها تسبیحات حضرت زهرا الله اکبر این همه جلال الله اکبر این همه شکوه الله اکبر در راه علی فاطمه ایستاده مثل یکو صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه صلی الله امشب ساکت نباشی ها صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه
ذکر نورانی عاشقان، تسبیحات حضرت زهرا، تسبیحات حضرت زهرا، تسبیحات حضرت زهرا. میدونم که راز شهادت این اشکا، رنگ خدا میگیرم من با تسبیحات حضرت زهرا. الحمدلله که نوکرتم، اللهم که مادرمی، الحمدلله از بچگیم مادر سایه روی سرمی. صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه، لک یا فاطمه، الله علیک یا فاطمه، صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه، صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه، صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه. فاطمه صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه، صلی الله علیک یا فاطمه. فاطمه یا علی روحی فدا، کوثرت شد نقش خاک. یا علی روحی فدا، کوثرت شد نقش خاک. یا علی روحی فدا، کوثرت. یا علی روحی فدا، کوثرت شد نقش خاک. یا علی رد شد نقش کاه. قتلگاه محسن دردانه را آتش زدن، فاطمه در خانه بود و خانه را آتش زدن. قتلگاه محسن دردانه را آتش زدن، فاطمه در خانه بود و خانه را آتش زدن. طوطی وحی خدا جان داد در کنج قفس. یا امیر المؤمنین افتاد زهرا از نفس. یا علی روحی فدا، کوثرت شد نقش خاک. کوثرت شد نقش خاک. یا علی روحی شد نقش کاک. ای مدینه کاش می گفتی به آن بی دردها، ای مدینه کاش می گفتی به آن بی دردها. یک زن تنها 40 نامرد، ای نامردها. کسی ندیده غنچه ای بالا، لعش پر پر. کودکی پیش از ولادت حامی یه مادرش. یا علی روحی فداش، کوثرت شد نقش خاک. یا علی روحی فداک، یا علی. ای بر علی یاور، ای مهربان مادر. ای بر علی در، ای بر علی یاور، ای مهربان. ای بر علی یاور مادر. من دختر مظلومت هستم، از چه نمیگیری دگر دستم. من دختر مظلومت هستم، از چه نمیگیری دگر دستم. دشمن که بر تو حمله برگردی، دشمن که بر تو حمله گردی، در پشت محسنت سپر گردی. ای کبرا را مظهر پاکی، صحرا کجا و چادر خاکی. ای بر علی داور، ای مهربان. ای بر علی ای بر علی آور ای مهربان ای بر علی آور ای بر علی آور
پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ کیا حال یہ امت نے زہرا کا بنایا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت ہے خاتون کوئی غم سے یوں چور نہیں دیکھی ایسی کوئی دنیا میں مستور نہیں دیکھی 18 برس میں ہی لگتی جو ضعیفہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی ہے دربار میں ظالم نے کی ایسی پذیرائی کس طرح سے تو بی بی پھر لوٹ کے گھر آئی بالوں کی سفیدی نے سب حال سنایا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی ہے دو ایسے جنازے ہیں تاریکی میں جو اٹھے بس گھر کے ہی لوگوں نے دونوں کو دیے کاندھے ایک فاطمہ زہرا ہے ایک بالی سکینہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے مرہم تیرے زخموں کا بی بی نہ ملا اب تک اولاد امیہ کی باقی ہے جفا اب تک رونے پہ بھی پہرا تھا تربت پہ بھی پہرا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے مسمار تیرا روزہ امت نے کیا جب سے بابا تیرا رہتا ہے تربت پہ تیری تب سے کب گنبد خضرا میں بابا تیرا رہتا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے
وسیدہ وویلا وويلا
وسيدا وويلا
وغربتا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
ومظلوما وويلا
سيدا وويلا
ومعصوما وويلا
سيدا وويلا
وسيدا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
وسيدا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
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 يا لي وسيدا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
وسيدا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
غربتا وويلا
سيدا وويلا
ومظلوما وويلا
سيدا وويلا
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 يا لي هاي هاي
هاي هاي هاي هاي
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا رسول الله، الصلاة والسلام عليك يا نبي الله، الصلاة والسلام على المصطفى الأمجد، الصلاة والسلام على حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد ورحمة الله وبركاته، الصلاة والسلام على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على البضعة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على الحسن المجتبى الولي الناصح الأمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى